So welcome back, everyone. Thank you for sort of listening to the first half of our podcast. Following on from the first half where we spoke to Nikki and Sophie about sort of menstrual health and period equality movement and how we engage people who disagree with us in our work here at Irise. We're going to continue this conversation now with a wonderful guest, Magid, who's kindly come on to sort of share his thoughts and experiences around engaging those who don't agree with us and don't quite align with our values and principles. So just to let you all know, if you don't know already, that Magid is the founder and director of Union of Justice. He's also the ex-Lord Mayor of Sheffield and an MEP as well. So Magid, over to you. Do you want to introduce yourself and just say hi to all the young people listening?
Yes, hello. It's a real pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for that introduction, Acushla, and of course for inviting me. My name is Magid, and from Sheffield originally, and from Somalia. But I guess I would say I'm an activist. I've held kind of different political positions, like I was a councillor, Lord Mayor of Sheffield, as well as an MEP representing Yorkshire and Humber. And I guess the two main areas I kind of really focus on is anti-racism and climate justice. And of course, a lot of the work that we do also means working with lots of young people because they are the agents for change a lot of the time. So I'm very fortunate to be doing something I'm passionate about. And I get to work with lots of amazing people, mainly a lot of young people as well, mainly from all across Europe and across the country. So it's a great pleasure to be here today.
Brilliant, thank you. And it's a pleasure to have you. So thank you for coming. So I think the first thing that we're going to talk about is basically what's the point of talking to people that don't agree with us in the first place? And do we think it's an important thing to do? Do we think that it's something we should bother our time with? I wondered what your thoughts on that were, firstly.
Yeah. As humans, we've all come in. Everyone's just got different opinions and different thoughts. We're not like we're not a monolith in any sense. And of course, that variety comes with lots of beauty and just lots of different things. So it's nice to have basically people that have got different opinions on things. So I think it's important and that people have got different opinions. But of course, naturally, you are going to come across people who don't share same values, opinions, and thoughts and similar to yours. But it's just, I guess, it's how you go about it kind of thing more than anything else. I always kind of think if you're on a truth-seeking process, you want to, and you're doing things with the best of intentions, and kind of going in with any assumptions or anything, I think it's really, really important. And I think even like it's our own opinions and whatever our thoughts and beliefs are, that can also change. It's like, we're allowed to change our opinions. It's not like we've got, this is it, this is my only worldview on something and I'm not going to completely change it. And I think, if anything, it's really healthy to challenge your own views and perceptions on things, because it will only ever be a win-win situation, because either you'll go out and you'll find out like, oh, maybe I am wrong, or like I didn't think of it from this perspective or whatever, so I need to kind of change. So you're growing as a person. Or on the other hand, you'd be like, it'll just reaffirm your already existing belief and kind of use it. It can only ever be a win-win situation. So I always encourage people to kind of challenge their own views, but also just going out and seeking knowledge. And of course, the more that we learn, the more that we develop and grow, the more that we change, like as people. So I think it's healthy, because one of the things as well you don't want to ever get stuck in is, of course, it's important to create safe spaces where like you've got people that kind of support you, stuff like that, but just being constantly stuck in, say, an echo chamber of, I think, therefore kind of like just believing that everybody believes in what you believe. And like a lot of like social media algorithms always reinforce that as well, because that's why you'll always get things that you're interested in, therefore kind of just perceive that the world and everyone kind of agrees with you. So it is really healthy, just to kind of step out of that and kind of engage with other people that don't necessarily agree with you. And of course, like putting forward your argument of what your thoughts on how you think this would be better, whatever, I think is really, really important. But I just think I'm sure we'll get into like tips and how to do and all that sort of stuff, but I just think it's healthy for, I guess in any workplace, but this is what it is, right? of course, different opinions, but we're not like, you have to have certain shared values and goals, because you can't be like working together and one person completely like disowns or disagrees and with your entire like value. Like there has to be, and I think with everyone that we disagree with, there's certain things that of course that we share in common, and that has to outweigh the differences for sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think like one of the things that we talk about quite a lot at Irise is how we can make these spaces in which that people with diverse numbers of opinions and responses and reflections can come together in the same space. And I think one of the rules that we have is sort of around intentions. So if your intentions are to be offensive, then obviously that's unwelcome. But if your intentions are to learn and to understand, and you might use some language or refer to like a school of thought which is offensive to some people, then it's about calling in rather than calling out. And that's something that we try and do our best with. But yeah, Sophie, do you want to comment on this? I know that you do a lot of work around this for Irise specifically.
Yeah, hi, it's really, really nice to meet you. Around that, around allowing our opinions to evolve. Like, I think I've definitely like spoken to people before where they've sort of said something at some point in time that contradicts something they've said in the past, but then they've like denied that they ever thought something different, which is just kind of ridiculous. And I think part of that whole like culture of seeing kind of evolution of opinions as a negative thing means that often people are a bit like afraid to put their opinion out into like the world, whether it's on social media or just with their friends, until the point where it's like fully formed. But the reality is that like our opinions are never like fully formed, or we're never fully informed on an issue. It's always like this process of continual learning. And I think, yeah, I just agree with what you're saying, Acushla, that like no one is born with any opinions. So I think even when someone says something that you think is kind of problematic or shocking, it's always best to approach that from a place of like trying to understand where that's come from. And it will often be the case that it's that they've only heard this one perspective, and then you kind of can expose them to other perspectives, and then you'll like learn together and grow your opinions together, which I think is just a really important and healthy process, really.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's especially something that comes up a lot because there's so much talk around diversity and inclusion at the moment in every aspect of social change. And I think one of the things that sometimes is misread is the fact that with diversity comes diversity of perspective. And it's not about getting a room of people together who all think exactly the same but look different. It's about genuinely having that sort of difference in opinion and perspective and understanding, and bringing those people together to find common values and shared values, I suppose. Yeah, for sure, definitely. And Nikki, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, it's nice to meet you too. Yeah, my mind kind of didn't necessarily go to people who disagreed with you, but more people who didn't necessarily agree or see certain problems as their own problem. But kind of like to add to what you've said about diversity, I think like you want diversity of experiences and approaches and ways of like experiencing something, because it leads to like diverse solutions. And like, I mean, Irise cares about period equality and addressing period poverty, but like these are issues which have existed alongside like other social inequalities for some time. And like if you keep looking at them the same way, which could be like looking at them as a responsibility of those most affected, or even just the responsibility of a charity, or just the responsibility of a small group of people, like we'll still have them. And that's why like diversity of interest groups as well and diverse solutions, I think, should be a focus too. I think as well, it makes me think of like the gap between those affected and those who have like the most power. Like obviously it's a bit idealistic, but if policymakers and politicians decided to were compelled to care about this issue the most, like we could essentially solve it tomorrow, really. But then, well, in a way, you could maybe direct more funding to like remove some limiting factors, but that's not going to happen. But I think it is important to like have more people who have this influence and this like power to like care, and then do what they can to amplify the voices of those who understand it in depth as well.
Absolutely. This idea that you don't have to have a fully formed opinion to feel like you can enter a conversation, I think is really important. And then from that, one thing that I wanted to ask you, Magid, is like, do you have sort of one experience where you feel like you've interacted with people who didn't quite agree with you and it went really well? And then do you have kind of the opposite as well? Do you have an experience where you didn't really get very far? Like, what's been your experience with that?
Yeah, and I guess the recent one was one of my friend's dad, who was basically one of the people who were against the England football team just kneeling, basically, and just even though what really kind of baffled me was, even though the football players that were kneeling were saying why they were doing it was basically to kind of highlight the Black Lives Also Matter kind of thing, he would kind of give a different reason, basically say, no, it's just they're doing it because they're Marxists and all this other kind of like nonsense. And for me, it was just a case of like, okay, because I kind of had the feeling that he'd gotten this information from somewhere else, because it just tends to be the case most of the time. So I'd be like, oh, like, Trevor, where did you get that information from? Like, how do you know that? Because this is what they're saying. There's all basically like, and I read it on the paper or like on Facebook. It's bang. Why can't they just kick a ball and just score and just keep politics out of it? But it's like, I don't understand. Well, everything's political. Like, it makes, even if they were to not do anything, that would still be saying something. It's true. That would be us choosing not to say anything. So I would argue it's even more important when you've got a platform or whatever to, of course, like we've all got some degree of influence. But yeah, that was like, and I think I managed to kind of get him run by basically just asking him questions rather than, I guess, just being really like dismissing him as if like he was stupid or whatever, which a lot of times, it's when people are in debates or whatever, people at times see it like a fight. So they'll be like, I just need to win and as long as I've got my point across, I'm going to walk away feeling good, which is, well, it's not having good intentions kind of thing, but it's just really trying to have an understanding, and just by asking questions first and foremost, and ideally letting him at times you can even just debate with other people just by simply asking questions and then allowing them to get to a situation where they're questioning themselves kind of thing, which kind of worked really, really well. And I think he eventually came to the realization, was like, oh yeah, he realized what he was saying, like he kind of backtracked on it and was like, maybe that's not what they mean kind of thing. But yeah, there's many cases where people that just don't agree with that. I just can't get them to see eyes. However, at times literally could even be people I work with on a specific approach. I think this is a strategy that we should kind of adopt. Because this will give us the best results. And they'll be like, well, no, because in my experience, and a lot of time as well, it's just, you should never really tend to generalize a lot of things, and people tend to share their own personal experience. So, well, their experiences and that, but whether that be literally like Brexit or the climate crisis or whatever, there's been many cases where I'm just trying to use my convincing skills just to try and like just speak to people, have an understanding. But at times, like, some people just want to see the world burn, Acushla, and you just can't like as much as you like. And as well, it's like, it's also kind of just knowing where to put your energy into, like, especially if it's people like that you don't work with, whatever. If people clearly are showing that they're not listening, they don't care what you have to say, all they care about is just making themselves feel better by putting you down, and it's just like, well, what's the point in this? Like, it's not a constructive like conversation or debate or whatever. It's also kind of knowing when to kind of like, yeah, this is not worth anybody's time or energy.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's like knowing when to stop, and when you're thinking, actually, it doesn't matter how much I hammer at this wall, like, it's not going anywhere. That makes a lot of sense. I think also like what you were saying around people often kind of believe in things without a huge amount of like fact checking behind it. We were talking about this today, actually, in that there's so much going on at the moment. Well, not just at the moment, I know there's always been a lot going on, but it's all like really in our faces, like with the climate emergency of what's happening, with the sea on fire, like, all of these crazy things that are actually happening in our life right now. It can be really difficult, I think, to know everything that's going on. And so it can be difficult to be like, can I enter this conversation? Yeah. Like, do I know enough? And as Nikki said, it's about caring, isn't it? Like, if you care, come into it.
Yeah, because the thing is, it's like, it's at the same time, people shouldn't be felt excluded out of conversations or from having an opinion, which at times people like might think, well, I shouldn't say anything or whatever because I don't understand what's happening. Of course, kind of share your opinion, but also it's incumbent upon all of us to kind of do a bit of research and just, I guess, where like critical thinking kind of comes into place, basically be like, right, where am I getting my sources from? Like, let me diversify that. Let me just see what other people are saying, or like, what are some trusted sources? Because like nobody's an expert on anything. You know what I'm saying? Even like everyone's getting their information from somewhere. A lot of times we rely on experts kind of thing. So it's kind of like reverting back to experts, but also then kind of reading up in that and then formulating an opinion on that. But yeah, you're right. We haven't got all the answers all the time, and it's okay. And you know as well, it's okay to say I don't know. Like, it's a lot of times people just feel as if like too embarrassed or trying to save face. Like, no, just like it's okay to be like, actually, I don't know much about this, so I'm just gonna go away and just kind of like read and I'll kind of contribute later or come back to me. You know, it's fine not to know kind of thing, but there is this, I feel at times, pressure for people to be up to date with everything and therefore have to contribute and say everything, which I think can be detrimental at times as well. So it's fine, we don't know everything, and it's a learning process for everyone.
Yeah, no, completely, it definitely is. Sophie, did you want to chip in?
Yeah, I think I was just going to say on the kind of topic of not like knowing everything. So like last week I was on a train and somebody said to me like, oh, you're wearing a mask, so clearly you've been like brainwashed into thinking like COVID is real and all of this. And then obviously I like disagreed with that, but he was kind of citing like papers and like people who were scientists, which were probably like YouTubers, but like I obviously didn't know, like I hadn't heard these arguments of the people that he was talking about, and I like couldn't bring to mind any like actual facts and figures or like any proper sources to like kind of counteract what he was saying, which made me feel like I was a bit kind of caught off guard. But I think I still tried to kind of have a conversation because, yeah, as you say, you don't have to have all the facts and figures to hand to be able to talk about something, because, you know, it's an unrealistic expectation to expect people to like carry all of that around in their head. And like at the end of the conversation, it was probably like a less than 5-minute conversation. I don't think I'd changed his mind and he hadn't changed mine. And I think an important takeaway from that is partly the fact that like when you're dealing with like complicated issues or things that like invite a lot of disagreement or emotion, you're not going to kind of change people's minds in just like one conversation. It's always like an ongoing process of learning, and what Magid said as well about like always looking at multiple sources. And of course that kind of takes time, but it's like time well spent.
If I could just add, I definitely agree with like what the two of you have said. I think it also kind of comes into play when you do start talking to people about causes you care about and compelling people to like care too, because especially with the whole thing of like, oh, you can't talk unless you know everything, or like it can be quite like, I guess, intense, but that's not the word I'm looking for. Like when you come up against someone who's like telling you that they know so much more and they're more knowledgeable, like is that the most productive way and helpful way to have a conversation? And I think on either side of that conversation, it's important to have, like, especially like when you see social media, and it does make a lot of information more accessible, but then it almost like feeds into this whole thing, like you see on stories, like, why aren't we talking about this issue? Or if you don't post about this issue, you don't care. And not everyone is ready or able to constantly like stay tuned into all these things. And then again, it's like, is this about the issue at hand, or is it about positioning yourself as some really knowledgeable person who knows about every social issue going? I think it can be like quite alienating to different, like to audiences and like people when you speak to them. And I think, yeah, keeping that into account, and like, oh, now I can imagine being in your position, Sophie, on a train and someone telling me I was brainwashed because like I believe different things to them, and then bombarding me with all these things they supposedly knew. And like, is it about that they really are that passionate about like we don't need to wear masks supposedly, or they're that passionate about not believing the mainstream narrative about COVID? Or maybe is this person getting off on like being able to tell you that they know so much more on this issue? Either one it is, like, it's not a really pleasant way to go about it. And I think that's like, especially when you can get carried away with like getting caught up in how passionate you are, like maybe sometimes taking a step back to think like, okay, how is this landing? How is this making the other person feel? Because like everyone said, no one's an expert on everything, and you are consistently learning.
Yeah, on that, I was going to say, Sophie, I can understand the situation you're in where I guess you're trying to go about your day and somebody's kind of made that kind of comment. And of course, they feel confident to make that comment because they've kind of read something or watched YouTube or whatever it is, and they know a little bit of information to kind of make it as if like you can't challenge them. And even in that case, I reckon I would just ask questions, even if I didn't like, say if I didn't, fair enough, you've like cited a doctor and a piece of paper. Clearly, I haven't got the time right now to like fact check your source. Like this is not the time or place for it. So I guess one of the things I would do, I would just ask them questions like, well, how did you get to that conclusion? Well, how many people, how many other doctors are medicated? Just by asking questions like when I don't know, will challenge that person just to like think for themselves or be like, even try to think their own kind of position. So I would like, in everything, I just always just resort to just asking lots of questions. And that way, like I will kind of have some understanding of where they're coming from, but also to find the pitfalls in their own argument kind of thing. So yeah, I guess when you get ambushed, it's like that and you're just not prepared or whatever. Or, yeah, I just think it helps.
Yeah, definitely. I think from that, I mean, that's quite a good sort of a piece of advice and tip there. But I was wondering if we could sort of go around and sort of say what we feel like from our experiences has been kind of our best piece of advice on how to engage people who disagree with us for the greater good, I suppose. And Magid, I'll start with you because I'm sure you've got a few.
Yeah, we've discussed quite a few, but I guess from the offset, I would always say it's, of course, have good intentions, but also don't assume that the other person's got bad intentions kind of thing. I think it definitely kind of goes both ways. And ask questions, like you said, just always kind of just ask questions, going with the attitude of listening, like actively listening, not just being like, all right, you said your point, let me get my point across kind of thing. And it kind of like setting the tone and the environment to kind of that, even like that verbal safe space would be like, of that understanding, it kind of really helps people lower their guard, both parties. So to kind of like have that honest, frank kind of civil conversation. Of course, stay calm. Because at times I appreciate at times people can say things that are offensive kind of thing. And I think you have to kind of like, I'll be honest with you, even before you have to kind of ask yourself if you're ready to kind of have that conversation and I kind of assess the situation. Well, what's your tolerance and what do you expect that person to say? Would it be really offensive? Will it get you upset kind of thing? These are kind of like the internal questions you have to kind of ask yourself in advance. And of course, it's like, make the argument, like kind of like try get your point across as honestly as you can, and look for agreements. Now, of course, like it's as well as you're going to find lots of disagreements, kind of really find the areas where you can agree with, just to try and build some sort of common ground and like tell stories, because nothing you can't generalize everything. And I guess just by sharing stories and anecdotes, again, really further to break down those barriers, but also really kind of gives real life examples and in like how it implements in real life, and it's not just some kind of theory. But yeah, they're the kind of like bits of advice that I definitely share.
Brilliant. I think like one thing that I think is really important is to consider the fact that like different opinions and different perspectives can mutually exist in the same space. I think there's always like this assumption that there's like a right and a wrong answer, or like one right and 100 wrong answers. But like actually, I think it's more of maybe a spectrum. Like I don't think it's that binary, that black and white. And it is. I think. Sorry, no. Go ahead.
No. What I was going to say is it's for example, some people would say, well, okay, it depends on what sort of kind of opinions or can kind of be. So for example, like say somebody's from the trans community, or somebody's like someone's father, someone's been attacked, says a girl who wears a hijab, kind of basically been, or just like it's really kind of personal. It's like, well, if someone's outwardly racist, would we like it's, well, okay, that's accepted. So it's like, and therefore, like, it's for some people, it'll just be like, well, I can't accept that because it's morally, I can't justify. Except, of course, those arguments, so that doesn't mean we're going to pretend there's non-racist people out there. There's all sorts of people kind of out there. So it's definitely accepting that kind of thing. But it's that's why, like, it's, I think it's just like knowing what you're getting yourself into, like, all that kind of discussion, argument. And maybe you just have to accept some people are just like, of course it's shit. Some people hold some really backwards, bigoted views, and there's nothing you can do about it, kind of thing. Of course, like, you can kind of try, but it's yeah. And maybe the thing is, maybe it won't be welcome in your space, but it still exists, kind of thing, unfortunately.
Yeah, they can exist at the same time, perhaps different places. And also what you were saying around sort of, if you might not be ready to like take on that conversation, I think that's something that's important to consider, is like always remember to put your mental health first, like, because these kind of conversations can be so emotionally draining, can be such a burden, and it's important to protect yourself first, I think, and always sort of think about that, especially as young people. Like, there's so much on young people's shoulders at the moment, and I think it's just knowing that, you know, if you're entering a space of activism and advocacy, they are often challenging spaces. That's the point, to challenge. So yeah, just to reflect on that and think, you know, do I have things in place to kind of support me if this isn't as easy as maybe I thought it might be? I think that is important.
I wouldn't say it's something I do enough, but I think asking questions is a really good thing to do, because like communication does involve like more than one party. Communication isn't telling someone something which you have to say. It's also like feedback with them and bouncing off them. And I think probably the most successful situations I've navigated when talking to people who maybe disagree with me, don't hold the same views, is when I've actually taken the step back to understand why. And then maybe you could see that your views aren't that completely different, or maybe you can actually see where the root is, and maybe it does come from like a shared point. I know, at least in like myself, I can be quite like, I don't know, I can be emotional when I hear things I don't like. Like if I hear something misogynistic or racist, like I can be off like upset about it before I remember I was speaking to someone the other day and I come across something like kind of hateful online. And they're like, yeah, I think that's like really horrible. Someone said that. But I can even hear that. I just went straight into like, how can people say these things? It's so horrible. And then started like telling my friend who had the same view, but like why it's so wrong. And be like, I agree with you. And like, that is like an important place where you do step back and not just say what you have to say, especially when you want to like, I don't know, unload things when you're frustrated. And like just thinking of times when like, I don't know, I've come up like, attending university, you meet students who have different backgrounds from you and like have different views from you. And I think a good thing to do is just to understand why and where those views have come across. It's like one which comes to mind is like speaking to like a male friend who said like, not all women deserve respect. And that really set me off. Like that was like 2-3 years ago. I think I made like a PowerPoint and decided I was going to run a workshop on respecting women. And I just got so angry. But then when I did actually sit with him and like speak to him and hear what he had to say, he was like, okay, I don't think all people just deserve respect if they're not going to respect me, which isn't necessarily my viewpoint. But rather than like getting carried away with like my frustration, like that at least led to more productive conversation. Like I kind of see the view that, okay, someone disrespects you, maybe you are reluctant to respect them. But I think it's nice to start with the benefit of the doubt and treat everyone with respect. And then, I don't know, it reflects more on if someone's disrespectful to you or doesn't see your humanity or is rude to you, well, that's about them. That doesn't necessarily have to affect how you treat other people. So then, okay, from a topic and a statement, which I don't know, I'm still getting angry about now, at least like asking them questions and hearing their side, I at least got more to the bottom of it. And I hope they also heard what I had to say too. And I think that was like a good example of me from like a successful communication of someone who like didn't necessarily agree with me. And definitely something I should try and do more and not get carried away with my frustration and just like hearing about an upsetting thing and wanting to rant about it.
And like giving them a bit of space, like an opportunity to like readjust their thinking. And I think relating to what Nikki was saying about, you know, like particularly I think when you disagree with people who are close to you, like your family and your friends, it can be like so emotionally charged. And like I found this a lot, like with my family. I think particularly more so when I was like a teenager, if I was like disagreeing, I would just get really angry and like end up like shouting and stuff like that. But that like almost never succeeds in, you know, being a productive conversation. And I think it can be really hard to like kind of step back and sort of be more calm about things, I suppose. And I think that, you know, there is always like a place for like anger and these like strong feelings as well. But I think it's generally more like productive to try and sort of just approach things a bit more calmly. And then I think another thing to say is about the kind of emotional burden that Acushla you were talking about, of kind of always speaking up, and the kind of how that can be quite emotionally challenging, emotionally draining. And I think it's important to think about like how that burden like isn't evenly distributed. And for example, how, you know, it's not just important to speak out for yourself, but like to speak out for other people. And for example, like if people are sharing kind of harmful perspectives on something that doesn't directly affect you, I think you then even have like even more of a responsibility to speak out than if it is something that affects you, because it's like otherwise you're expecting the person who is affected by that to always have to be speaking out without like any kind of support or without anyone like standing by them.
I just want to kind of just add something onto that. I guess it's you can disagree with someone while still understanding why they've come to that kind of conclusion, because it could be personal, whatever it is. So I think one of the things I always try and do is just try and understand to the best I can, but still disagree with the person, but just show them that I understand how they've come to that conclusion, but kind of like share like my kind of thoughts. And but also I would also encourage people to really share their sources, because at times it's like, fair enough, like you may have kind of read this great book or got your source from somewhere, but share those sources with others, especially as people you're like, you're trying to convince. It's no good for you to hold all the cards and not share your sources or where you've got your information from. So I always kind of encourage people to kind of share wherever the sources they've got it from.
Yeah, that's a really good tip actually. Is I think also just sometimes like making experiences into data, which is like actually easier than you might think. I suppose, like, I mean, recently there's been sort of, I know it's been all over Twitter where a woman got an IUD fitted, and she was in like a ridiculous amount of pain, and she tweeted about it, and then suddenly loads of women were coming out and saying how painful it was to have the coil inserted, and they were saying, you know, it's been horrific, like even though doctors have said that it doesn't hurt. But then what she did from that was create a survey, and just, you know, any survey that you do on Google Forms or whatever, and sent it out, and got like hundreds and thousands of replies of women experiencing the same thing. And I think you can take a conversation and just like one experience, and if it gets that momentum and other people are experiencing it as well, you can easily make that into like data.
Sorry, I just wanted to say that I think like sometimes I found, because I think that like all of us here have like kind of been to university, and I found that sometimes like engaging with people who haven't been to university, such as like people in my family, they don't necessarily like sort of see the importance of like facts and figures, and I think when you kind of throw facts and figures at people, it can like seem kind of patronizing in a way. And I was wondering if Magid had any kind of thoughts on that kind of experience, and that like, I guess, like power imbalance that's sometimes involved, where you're like coming from a place of like, you know, research and education kind of thing, and talking to someone who isn't from that same position in a way.
I think it was Michael Gove, someone in the government cabinet said that people are tired of facts and figures. But of course, like I think it's just more about communication. And a lot of the times people tend to engage emotionally on things, or kind of formulate things based on emotion. And it could be at times that you're right, just throwing facts and figures at people just goes right over their head, especially if it's not within context or things that you just don't understand. So a lot of the time it's also understanding where that person, and just trying to meet people where they are. So for example, like, I think that kind of comes with knowing the person that you're speaking to. If you know, for example, like if you cite this source, then that would really help that person understand. Or if you just throw in facts and figures, it doesn't kind of like necessarily work at times. So it's just trying to have it. Of course, like research is important, data is important, all those things are important, but it's just how you then try and translate that into, whether that could be like getting a bit of that information and then trying to share a story of how that's impacted as a way to try and communicate that. But it's just saying 76% of these people from this, like, you just, yeah, but even then, like, as well, when you throw data, it's like, well, how big was the sample size? Like, was it like, even within the data, it's like, it's not all kind of like the holy grail kind of thing, but of course it is important. But it's just trying to like communicate that, whether that just, I don't know, like stories seem to be a good way, or just trying to give it more context, basically, tends to help than just throwing numbers and data at people.
Cool, thank you both for that. That was really interesting. But yeah, I think what we'll do is we'll probably wrap it up here. But I just want to thank you so much for your time. I mean, all of you. I also wondered whether, Magid, did you want to sort of talk a little bit about your Union of Justice? Just because I think that the young people listening to this will probably be really interested in that movement and what you've created there.
Yes, so very briefly, like Union of Justice, we're a European people of colour led organisation that's dedicated to climate justice and racial justice. As we can't talk about the climate crisis without recognising that it is an inequality and race issue. And there's kind of three things that we basically do. So one of them is really just empowering people. So we kind of like give people the skills and the tools to bring about change where they are. Second thing we do is influence. So we kind of work with elected representatives, work on policy proposals, and kind of just try and shift policy in that aspect. And the third thing we do is change. We'll try to do that through campaigns, whether that be rebutting eco-fascist narratives to campaigning for a European Green Deal. But it's basically just trying to put those people who are mostly affected by the climate crisis at the heart of the conversation, because it's a collective effort more than anything else. So we kind of have to make sure that those who are at the front line voices are heard, basically.
Brilliant. That sounds amazing. Thank you. And so is there sort of like a website or a handle?
Yes, you can find us on all social media, kind of like Union of Justice, and unionofjustice.com, Union of Justice on Instagram and Twitter.
Cool.
And stuff.
Brilliant. All right. Thank you so much for your time. So now we're going to wrap up the podcast, and we're all going to share our key piece of learning from the discussion that we've had, and what we think you should take away with you and incentivize in your own activism and advocacy. Sophie, do you want to go first?
Sure. So I've learned so much today from Acushla and Nkechi and Magid. So it's quite hard to just pull out one thing. But I think for me, the key takeaway that I would encourage our listeners to think about as they kind of go forward with their activism is that anytime you're engaging with someone you disagree with, just to ask loads of questions. And most importantly, don't just ask questions, but make sure you genuinely listen to the response, so that way you can genuinely understand where the other person is coming from. And that just sets a great baseline for really positive debate.
Brilliant, thank you. And Nikki, how about you?
Yeah, one thing this conversation has made me think of, kind of similar to Sophie's point, is how I am listening and engaging with other people on, like, to have a disagreement. There's two sides to that. And like, how do you not only think about how people are disagreeing with you, but how you disagree with others, and like listening to each other, understanding different perspectives, understanding how maybe a shared notion can be expressed as two really different perspectives, and just general, like, who are we listening to? I guess that's something we all could think about. Are we listening to what we want to hear and how great the work we're doing is, or are we listening to the people who are telling us what's needed? So yeah, a lot around listening and like engaging with others.
Amazing, thank you. And yeah, I think my key learning would be sort of something to enable both of what you've just said, which is probably when you do talk to someone who disagrees with you, is to just stop and don't react from your emotions, which can be really difficult because so much of advocacy and activism is tied to your emotions and what you care about. But I would just kind of remember to pause and take a deep breath and think, what do I want to gain from this conversation? Like, what can I do to make myself a good listener and to make my worldview expand as well as theirs? And whether and if your response encourages emotion, then great. But I think it's always good to take that step back and just reflect and think, what do I want to gain from this conversation and what can I give to this conversation? So yeah, and then just to thank you already, thank you to Magid and Sophie and Nikki for joining us. It's been really wonderful to have you here to discuss all of these important things in advocacy and activism. And if anyone needs any sort of follow-up support from this conversation, feel free to go to the Irise website, which is www.irise.org.uk, or you can find us on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. And our handle is irise_INT. You can drop us a message there. This podcast was made possible thanks to the Act for Change Steering Group, co-producers Molly Scarborough and the Arts Development Company and Act for Change Fund.